Perhaps each of us dreams of stepping foot in Alaska, once to witness the dazzling aurora borealis in the Arctic sky. But if we venture deep into the city centre, what awaits us is no longer beauty, but a living graveyard, a place where forgotten people struggle day by day amidst the frost. Alaska was once known as the promised land for the brave, a place where the wild nature hinted at opportunities and rebirth. But in 2025, the dark side of that dream has become clearer than ever. Homelessness is spreading rapidly, even in once peaceful cities like Anchorage and Fairbanks. No longer just homeless, but even not warm enough to survive the freezing winter. In today's video, what you see about Alaska will no longer be the glamorous tourist scenes that the media often embellishes. Instead, there are tents covered in frost, faces turning blue and shivering in the snowy night, and fates quietly forgotten amidst the cold nature. In the imagination of many, Alaska is still a place of freedom and new beginnings, where people struggle against nature to survive and bond with each other to live. But now, this very place is witnessing a wave of disintegration, not of ice, but of social cohesion. The issue of homelessness here is no longer an isolated phenomenon, but a crisis that is spreading to every corner, from downtown Anchorage to remote villages, from wandering youth to retired elders. Ironically, a land twice the size of Texas, with a population of less than 1 million, does not have enough space for everyone to have a home. According to official statistics, over 2,686 people were recorded as homeless in just one night in 2025 in Alaska. And the actual number could be much higher, as most lie hidden in deep forests or scattered residential areas that are difficult to account for. But this is not just a story about numbers, but it is about a social paradox, why a state abundant in natural resources, oil and gas, forests, fisheries, cannot protect its most vulnerable people. The answer may begin with the weather. Here, winter is not just a season, but an unspoken sentence. With temperatures reaching as low as negative 79.8 degrees Fahrenheit, even a small mistake can become a fatal ending. Every year, dozens of lives are frozen due to hypothermia or suffocation when trying to keep warm by burning everything they can find. A heating gas cylinder can cost hundreds of dollars, an unimaginable price for someone without a stable income. The thin tents by the roadside, the sleeping bags in the woods, the frostbitten hands, are terrifying reminders that in Alaska, poverty is not just an injustice or a personal tragedy. It is also a risk related to survival. But the weather is just the tip of the iceberg. Deep beneath the surface are thicker icebergs, crystallized from a series of tightly interconnected causes. Rising prices, a housing shortage, seasonal unemployment, and an overloaded social assistance system. An average apartment in Anchorage now costs about $1,200 per month, while the price of milk can reach $5 per gallon. With an economy dependent on oil, tourism, and fishing, seasonally unstable industries, thousands of people fall into instability after just one harsh winter. And in that precarious balance, the elderly are one of the most vulnerable groups. They live on a fixed pension, which is not enough to keep up with the rising cost of living. A heating repair bill, a prescription not covered by insurance, one late rent payment. Each of those small things could be the beginning of a downward spiral with no way back. So what has pushed a land rich in resources, once a place where people came to find hope, to become a place where the cold prevails over the warmth of the heart? And if even in Alaska, once considered the last frontier of the American dream, there is no longer a refuge for the weak, then is there anywhere truly safe for those who are falling behind? Alaska no longer has space for the homeless on the ground, so they are sending the homeless up into the sky and flying them straight to California, a makeshift measure to eliminate the poor under the guise of humanitarianism. This policy was implemented by the mayor of Anchorage, Dave Bronson, in the middle of winter, when the number of people unable to withstand the harsh cold was steadily increasing. Just this year, there have been at least 29 fatalities due to those harsh weather conditions. In that situation, he announced a quick, cost-effective, and humane solution, using the city budget to buy one-way plane tickets for the homeless, flying them straight to Los Angeles. So what is the reason? In Alaska, the cold can devastate a person's life, and the cost of maintaining a temporary shelter in Anchorage is higher than a one-way economy class ticket to the south. Bronson believes he has no other choice after the state government denied his request to build an emergency winter shelter. At first glance, this proposal seems reasonable. Even it is cloaked in a humanitarian guise, as a way to help the poor escape the frost. But when a city chooses to solve the poverty problem by relocating the poor elsewhere, the issue is no longer about the budget, but it lies in the limits of human compassion and how society perceives the value of existence for those who have nothing left to give. Los Angeles, the destination in this plan, is also struggling with one of the most severe homelessness crises in the United States. With 76,000 homeless people, but only 43,000 shelter beds. This place has been overwhelmed for a long time. Accepting more people leaving Alaska is no different from adding fuel to the smoldering fire. It's no surprise that the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, called Bronson's proposal a dangerous farce. According to her, this is not a humanitarian act, but a political stunt aimed at tarnishing the image of cities run by the Democratic Party. And perhaps she is not entirely wrong. Because when the poor become a cost to be cut, and the movement of people is measured in dollars, we are no longer discussing solutions. We are playing a game of avoiding responsibility. Worse, the unspoken message being sent is, if your city is too cold to keep the poor alive, send them away, let someone else deal with them. But if each city chooses that way, then where will be the last place they can land? In that context, compassion has no place to land, just like the homeless themselves, who are seen as burdens that can be shipped away. Anchorage's plan is not only controversial for its inhumanity, but also raises a painful metaphor. Is America becoming a country where the poor are shipped back like unwanted packages? Behind those flights called temporary solutions, are we trying to save them from winter? Or are we trying to escape our own responsibility? Perhaps anyone who has ever lived in Alaska understands that winter in this state is not only cold enough to freeze water, but also to freeze the fate of human beings. Anchorage, the largest city in the state, has begun clearing homeless camps just before winter. At a time when the -30 degrees Fahrenheit cold can cut into the flesh like a frozen blade. They call it urban management. But if you stand in the tattered shoes of those who have to sleep on the frozen ground, you will understand. It is not a solution, but a way of cleaning up, to erase them from the seemingly idyllic winter landscape of Alaska. Sullivan Arena, once the largest shelter, has been closed since May. No alternative shelter, no backup plan. And then, one by one, they gradually fell. By the end of the year, 43 people had frozen to death outside, a record number never seen in the city's history. That number is as cold as the very ground they are lying on. To be able to sleep, many people have to drink alcohol instead of warm blankets. Not because they are addicted, but because alcohol is the only thing that can keep their hearts warm for another night. But even if they survive, the price to pay is not small. Some lose their feet to necrosis. Some people woke up and found that the person lying next to them had turned into a snowman. There are even those who, with no other choice, have burned their possessions to keep warm for just one last autumn night. For women, the cold is not the only enemy. In the crowded camps, they frequently face dangers both physical and mental. Many people choose to sleep alone. In the freezing weather, because being frozen in the heart of the city seems to be less painful than being hurt by those in the same situation. A harsh choice between two types of pain, physical and mental. After each eviction, one only sees the tents flattened, blankets and pillows thrown onto garbage trucks, and the dazed eyes following their belongings, which are also their last memories, being swept away like invisible waste in the city. No one asks, is the government doing anything? Because everyone knows nothing will be done. Even the proposal to buy one-way plane tickets to send homeless people to Los Angeles doesn't really come from compassion. It's more like a way of saying we can't and don't want to keep them here. A push wrapped in the guise of humanitarianism. Perhaps what makes winter in Alaska so cold is not just the ice and snow, but the indifference in people's hearts. When poverty is expelled like waste and human life is measured by a one-way plane ticket, can we still call it a civilized society? But the fear does not only exist among those sleeping on the icy ground. It also creeps into the houses still lit, into the hearts of the residents who still have a home. Those who once thought they were immune to the chaos outside, but now begin to realize that their very community is changing day by day. The residents began to complain about the midnight screams, about the petty thefts, about the feeling of unease when walking down the street they once knew like the back of their hand. There are those who avoid passing through the once familiar alleys, simply because those places have now become temporary shelters for the homeless. But when asked, do you want them to disappear? Logically, most remain silent or hesitated. Not because they don't have an answer, but because the answer is too complex to articulate. Because they know the homeless are not the cause. They are the symptoms. Symptoms of a system that is cracking, where rent exceeds income, where mental health support is cut to dangerous levels, where an accident, a medical bill, or a personal loss is enough to turn someone from a homeowner into a person sleeping on the sidewalk. And most importantly, where even those who have dedicated their entire lives can still be abandoned when they need help the most. That feeling, both fear and guilt, plunges the community into a paradox. They want to protect their children, keep the neighborhood peaceful, but they also don't want to lose something very fundamental in humanity: compassion. They fear for their family's safety, but they also fear losing the kindness that once made this place home. No one has an easy answer. Conversations between neighbors became tense, not because they disagreed, but because they all felt powerless. The feeling of living between two fears, on one side, the risk of social instability, and on the other, the worry of losing oneself, as a human, as a community. And then the question quietly echoes, haunting more people than they dare to admit. How to protect the place you love, without abandoning those who need it the most. There is a quiet truth unfolding in Alaska that few want to confront. Many homeless individuals are not lazy or giving up, but rather have been left behind by a system that once promised to protect them. In the biting cold of the Arctic, where winter stretches like a survival challenge, a roof over one's head is no longer a basic right, but a luxury privilege for too many. There was a time when just working hard was enough to rent a modest place. But now, a small room in Anchorage can consume nearly all of a monthly pension check, if you're lucky enough to still have one. Rental prices keep rising, while assistance payments are continuously cut or delayed. The programs that once helped low-income individuals stabilize their lives are gradually disappearing in silence, as if the problem would also vanish if we stop mentioning it. Worse still, when temporary shelters are all overloaded, waiting lists are hopelessly long, and housing subsidies are insufficient to keep up with the skyrocketing real estate market. Hundreds of people are stuck in the gap between not poor enough to qualify for assistance and not rich enough to afford rent. A grey area where those who once had homes, once had stability, now have to pitch tents or rely on the kindness of strangers. The local authorities continue to make commitments, hold meetings and announce long-term plans. But the weather doesn't wait for anyone. A snowstorm doesn't need budget paperwork to appear, and a roof to shelter overnight can't be postponed until next year. In a society that once prided itself on leaving no one behind, the question arises: how many of them are being left behind? Quietly, coldly, and invisibly. How many of us who once lived stably now feel uncertain about our own future? And if even in a freezing place like Alaska, the most numbing cold does not come from the weather, but from the growing indifference within the community, is there still a truly warm place to call home? If you believe that no one deserves to be left behind in the winter, please like, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. Because change always starts with understanding. And who knows, through small conversations, we might be able to retain a bit of warmth for a society that is gradually growing colder. While the locals are leaving Alaska in search of survival opportunities elsewhere, there is also a quiet reverse wave happening. People from all over the country are coming to this land, bringing with them the hope of a new beginning, and sometimes simply a chance to survive. They are called modern-day migratory birds. Homeless individuals from other states who fly to Alaska because they have heard that this is a place with better support services, less stigma, and a more peaceful landscape. But what they encounter is a reality colder than any winter night. Struggle, despair, and alienation in a community that is also struggling to take care of itself. Some people come because they heard that Alaska has a housing assistance program. Some others simply because they were encouraged to leave their old state with free plane tickets, a policy that has been implemented in some places like San Francisco, Portland, or even Anchorage. They didn't come here to cause trouble. They come because there is nowhere else to go. But when the entire city is already overwhelmed, adding one person or a few dozen people puts even more pressure on the already fragile support system. As a result, newcomers cannot find shelter, and locals feel sidelined in their own community. The simmering tension, the growing suspicion, and the coldness in people's hearts increasingly freezes what should be shared: compassion and empathy. In a society experiencing numerous fractures in trust, the economy, and even the community, the fact that those who are suffering must compete for each mattress and each hot meal is a cruel irony. No one truly wins. And everything is gradually melting away like snow under the spring sun, silent, exhausted, and disappearing from common sight. How much of our humanity can we retain in a society that is gradually freezing over due to indifference? Or is it the silence in the face of others' pain that is making us a part of that cold storm? And if the answer is that elsewhere, they are forgotten, driven away, rejected, then Alaska is not just the final destination, but perhaps the final end. Not because they chose it, but because no one else chose them anymore. Year after year, the budget to support the homeless is approved, councils are convened, and public meetings are held. But when winter arrives, the same scene is still witnessed. Flimsy tents in the park covered in ice, cardboard sheets under the bridges, and eyes red from cold and despair. Local non-profit organisations had once cried out for help. They had urgently requested the city to provide support to open temporary shelters, to rent vacant hotel rooms, or at least not dismantle the temporary camps in the middle of winter. But the system responds at the pace of melting ice, slowly, hesitantly, and full of excuses. The most common reason? Budget consensus not reached, need to reassess safety policies, or insufficient personnel to implement the new plan. Some people liken it to Alaska, where proposals to help the homeless have a longer lifespan than the very people they aim to assist. While a person might not survive the cold after just a few hours, a plan to open a temporary shelter could take several years to be approved. And then, like an endless loop, each winter begins with a familiar debate in the city council. Should emergency funds be used to open temporary shelters? Should we reactivate community centres to serve as shelters for the homeless? The answer often is not yet. The government is not heartless, but they are trapped in the machinery they themselves created. In the blizzard of procedures, budgets, and controversies, the only thing left behind is the people. So people began to ask, why can't a country that once sent people to the moon get them off the streets? Why can't a resource-rich state like Alaska keep its most vulnerable residents warm? Alaska, a land once dubbed the last frontier of America, where people came to start anew, to find peace amidst the majestic nature and the opportunity for a different life. But now, that very place is becoming the last frontier of oblivion. In Anchorage, in the dim light of the short winter days, one can see more clearly than ever a chilling truth. The future of this state is freezing, not just literally, but metaphorically as well. No longer a land of new beginnings, Alaska is slowly becoming a place where those abandoned by the system must come to await their end. A final refuge, not because it is welcoming, but because there is nowhere else to go. The locals are not lacking in kindness, but kindness cannot replace policy. And empathy cannot stop the harshness of a night with a temperature of -30 degrees. When each winter arrives, a new tent still spring up, and news of silent freezing in the snow still reaches us. It is clear that what is freezing is not just the human body, but the collective conscience of a society that is gradually becoming numb. And if this continues, not only the future of the poor and the marginalized will be frozen, but the future of Alaska and the entire United States will also be paralyzed by indifference and disorientation. Because a society is not measured by GDP, but by how it treats those who have nothing left in their hands. So the final question is, if one day you or your loved ones, for some reason, find yourselves homeless and without shelter, would you still believe that this system would embrace you? Or will you also be left behind, like thousands of others, sleeping in the freezing cold of the distant north? In a place dubbed the frozen paradise, the poor become cold shadows amidst the white snow. They do not freeze because of a lack of will or laziness. They wither away because no one listens anymore. No one is willing to stop and look into the eyes that are gradually drying out from the cold and from despair. We have built bright cities, billion-dollar tourist resorts, but there is no longer a place for a warm shelter where people can sleep without worrying about waking up as ice. We make excuses of budget, policy, procedures to delay all actions, but winter waits for no one. So when will a place like Alaska, once a symbol of fierce survival, stop being cold to its own people? What do you think about the homelessness crisis in Alaska? Please share your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel and stay updated with our latest videos. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video. This video is based on reports, data, and information publicly released from media sources, non-governmental organizations, and statistical data from state authorities. All opinions, analyses, and arguments in the video are intended for educational purposes, social critique, and raising community awareness, not for criticizing any specific individual.